on Sky News Australia. This is the Rita Panahi Show.
Good evening and welcome to the Rita Panahi Show. Coming up tonight, what's behind the rift between the Victorian Liberal leader and the federal Liberal leader, Peter Dutton? The new chair of the Australian Sports Commission, Kate Jenkins, criticised for undermining female athletes with a raft of trans inclusion policies. David Limbrick joins me to discuss. We'll have the great Alex Epstein fact-checking Albo's big battery claims. And Kinsey Schofield joins me with the latest celebrity news, including reports that Kate Blanchett has taken a stand on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And in Lefties Losing It, we get marriage advice from the leader of the free world.
I say to every young man thinking of getting married, marrying a family with 5 or more daughters. I did. My wife's the oldest of 5 sisters. You know why? One of them will always love you.
Here to go over the day's top stories is Sky News contributor Kosha Gator. Kosha, just as the Victorian Liberals get some good news, they had a fantastic poll in The Age this week. John Pesutto, their hapless leader, goes and spoils it. He's got a feud with Peter Dutton happening. The Herald Sun reports in a move that stunned sections of the party and some of his own MPs, John Pesutto this week refused to attend a Liberal Party multicultural dinner headlined by Peter Dutton after being told he wouldn't be allowed to make a speech. His political judgment is lacking, to say the least. Kosha?
It would be hard to draw any other conclusion, for sure. Not exactly covering himself in political savvy. Infighting is never a good look. Having internal dirty laundry within a party airing out is never a good look. We see these cracks happening more and more in different political parties. Here, of course, it seems to all be downstream from that original sin of the more redeeming situation, and everything went sideways from there. And you're just seeing it show up in different ways. It was a bit ironic because it was a multicultural dinner, and that's his portfolio, but here we are.
And it's said that more redeeming affair does have a fair bit to do about this rift. It's been reported Peter Dutton wasn't particularly happy with the timing of some of that action, undermining the lead up to the Aston by-election. So you can understand why the feds would be looking on, not too happy, because you would think if any state has a party that should be flying in opposition, it should be the Liberals. The problems we've got in this state with the debt, highest debt of any state in the country, state taxes going up, so much dissatisfaction. And yet, despite this poll, I think most people would expect if there was an election today, Labor would win.
Indeed. A lot of people did expect that after the lockdown fiasco as well, and we did have an election, so who knows? That's a bigger topic, but it does feel a little bit like snatching defeat from the jaws of victory.
Yeah.
Where all the fundamentals are favourable to the Liberal Party, as you pointed out, and it feels like a little bit of a head-scratcher that if they're not able to advantage that for their own re-electoral prospects, then what would it take?
Now to a story broken by the Australian newspaper that really exposes some troubling cultural issues at Channel 9. The chief executive, Mike Sneesby, is now urging the company's staff to come forward with any complaints about inappropriate behaviour. This follows claims about former news boss Darren Wick's behaviour. But Kosha, this concern for the welfare of staff only came about after the Australian broke this story. Before that, they appeared to be going out of their way to hide any wrongdoing in the workplace. So excuse me if I'm a little bit dubious about their claims of caring about the welfare of staff.
You know, it has shades, and obviously this is still an investigation internally that's ongoing, and that will run its course. But from what we know so far, it really, to me, had shades of all these other things that we've seen, whether it was Fox News, CBS, Les Moonves, Harvey Weinstein in Hollywood, like in all those situations, Matt Lauer at NBC, you know, it was sort of, I'm not equating any of those people to this scenario, but it's in the same category, basically, of somebody who was obviously misbehaving against staff in a pretty egregious way. Everybody knew about it, and they never say anything until somebody leaks it, breaks it, or it gets impossible to ignore, and then they can conduct these internal investigations, and maybe this is in that same vein.
Well, we'll see. At this point, nothing has been proven, but there's certainly allegations and how someone in a position of power left their job. I think that is also something that Channel 9 weren't completely transparent about at the time. Reporter Avi Yemeni has captured incredible footage of himself being threatened by pro-Palestinian activists, thugs really, as Victoria Police looked on.
I'm gonna get you.
You're gonna what?
I'm gonna get you.
What are you gonna do?
Leave.
What are you gonna do?
Leave.
What are you gonna do to me?
Leave.
What are you gonna
Leave.
do?
Hey, don't touch
What are you gonna
him.
do
You
to me?
came my way. You off. You understand?
What are you gonna do?
Stay out of my
You came my way.
Stay out of the camera, wait.
You want me to show you?
You better grab him, mate. Get him up. Back off.
Why did you come my way? Why? Why did you come my way? You filming this,
This is Victoria, man.
Kosha, the police watched a man throw what looked like a bottle, looked like their threats were being made, a lot of aggression, and they did nothing, even as they see the entire thing being filmed. So if they've got someone here with a profile who's got a camera crew there and they don't do nothing, I hate to think what their approach would be if you're just an ordinary person who's attacked in this way.
For sure. It's hard to really understand why when there's such an obvious case of assault or violence or somebody, flinging a bottle, as you say, that's when it crosses that line. There's a lot of talk about freedom of speech and protecting protesters' rights versus when it crosses over. That would be an example of when it crossed over. And it is interesting. I'm not sure we could speculate that maybe there's politics that's baked into this issue so much that it's affecting the way the police are deciding in real time what they do or don't do. But needless to say, for somebody like Avi, who had a camera behind him and captures his footage, it's not a good look. And obviously he's got a big audience and he's going to market that and expose, what he experienced there.
Victoria Police really need to be far more consistent in how they apply the law. They can't have this two-tier policing, this selective policing where if they like the alleged victim, they step in. If they don't, then we can't do anything. This is really undermining faith in the police force. Now let's go to the UK, where Prime Minister Rishi Sunak made the surprise announcement that the general election will be held on July 4 this year. The Daily Telegraph calls it a gamble, that's putting it lightly. They also mocked his rain-drenched appearance with "things can only get wetter." His party is behind in the polls, Kosha, badly, 27 points behind Labor, according to the latest YouGov poll for The Times. But you have inflation falling. He's got this Rwandan plan that finally seems to be making its way through Parliament. How do you assess this decision to go early? When you're this far behind, it's a gamble indeed.
It's a gamble. I've heard it described as a suicide mission instead of
I like that one better. Yeah.
That you're going down, so just cut your losses and go down on your own terms, earlier. Who knows? But it seems like something along those lines. We talked earlier about snatching defeat from the jaws of victory. This is kind of the same thing. They had a massive majority in 2019. People in the UK are really, really dissatisfied with both parties. Huge issues, immigration, inflation, all of that. The same in their counterparts everywhere. And if there were ever a party that had an opportunity to present high contrast positions that address those issues, it should have been the Liberal Party when they're in power. They completely failed to do that. And many are not surprised, including people who are sympathetic to them or voters of them. A lot of them say that they deserve to lose.
Oh, the Tories have been so hopeless. They really have. They've been in power for such a length of time, but it seems like the bureaucracy has run the show, and you really wonder how much worse Labor can be. I guess we'll find out very shortly. Now to an Israeli campaign group, which has released really disturbing footage here, and I do give a warning for people to step away from the television because this is disturbing footage. This is female troops being captured by Hamas militants on October 7. The families of these victims want this footage to be shown. These young women are still hostages of Hamas.
والله ما ندعس عليكم يا كلاب يا عم يا عم بالراحه يا عم
هاي السبهاي هاي الهمل no beautiful
And Kosha, the plight of these hostages has been lost in the coverage that we're getting. There's nothing mentioned in all these protests and marches, the pro-Palestinian marches and campus protests. There's nothing said about the hostages. It's almost, they're hostile to any mention of the hostages. We saw the posters of the hostages being torn down early on. And you look at that and it is just so sadistic and barbaric.
It is sadistic and barbaric, and that's why the family members released it, I think, because they're trying to bring attention back to this issue. They're being very critical of the leadership, of Israeli leadership, because these are Israeli troops, and whether rightly or wrongly, they're saying it's been more than 6 months, 7 months. Where is the hostage negotiation strategy? Where is the hostage rescue plan? Why aren't they more of a focal point, as you say? And I think this issue has just morphed, its tentacles have turned up in all sorts of venues, from free speech to immigration and different factions of people who view this Israel versus Palestine issue through different lenses. But the one thing that was the most unifying in all of it was innocent hostages needing to be released. All sides generally agree with that, and it's completely gotten lost in the fog of war.
Absolutely. And some world leaders are rewarding Hamas's barbaric attack by announcing that they recognise the state of Israel. Here's Irish Prime Minister Simon Harris.
Last month I stood on these same steps with Prime Minister Sanchez of Spain, and we said that the point of recognising the state of Palestine was coming closer. That point has now arrived. Today, Ireland, Norway and Spain are announcing that we recognise the state of Palestine. Each of us will now undertake whatever national steps are necessary to give effect to that decision.
Israel's Minister of Foreign Affairs wrote on X, today's decision sends a message to the Palestinians and the world that terrorism pays. He also said these countries are choosing to reward Hamas and Iran by recognising a Palestinian state. Strong words there. Now, before you go, Kosha, Fox News' Bill Melugin has done superb work on the US border crisis. He's been reporting on it for many years. We've seen millions pouring through that southern border illegally every year of Biden's presidency. Here he is interviewing some recent arrivals, and this group are not economic migrants from Mexico or even South America. They have travelled all the way from Asia and the Middle East to cross into the US through the southern border.
Where are you guys from? What country?
Pakistan.
Pakistan.
India.
India. Where are you from?
Turkey.
Turkey?
Yeah.
Turkey. Okay.
India.
India. Where are you guys from?
Turkey.
Turkey. Turkey? Where are you guys from?
China.
China.
Ecuador.
Ecuador? Where are you guys from?
India.
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 And Kosha, we're hearing the numbers may increase further because they want to take advantage of what could be Joe Biden's final months in office. And it really is incredible to see more than 2 million every year under Biden coming in this way.
So brazen, and in the era of airfare and air travel, it's not a surprise that people can travel and fly in from anywhere in the world, cross the border that is wide open. This is an issue that is also unifying the electorate in a way as never before. People don't want it, and it may well be his downfall.
Kosha Gaither, thank you so much for your time this evening. Joining me now is Victorian Libertarian MP David Limbrick. Now, David, the new chair of the Australian Sports Commission, Kate Jenkins, has said, "My vision is for sports to be safe, fair, accessible and inclusive for everyone, with every athlete supported to reach their full potential." Sounds wonderful. But before female athletes celebrate this a little too much, the CEO of Women's Forum Australia, Rachel Wong, reminds us that Jenkins helped destroy the female sporting category when she implemented trans inclusion guidelines in her previous role as a sex discrimination commissioner, Wong writes. So in other words, Kate wants safe, fair, etc. sport for everyone except women and girls. David, I know you are deeply involved in this issue. Is that a fair assessment, or should we give Kate Jenkins an opportunity to show what she's going to do in this new role?
Well, look, I think what Rachel Wong's saying here is exactly right in that ultimately the reason that different sporting classes were separated between boys and girls is because there's physical differences. And just taking hormones for a period of time doesn't change any of that. The fact of the matter is that females and males are different, and if they want to have sports that are separated, then they should be allowed to do that.
Now, let's go to the energy crisis. New South Wales and Victorian households are facing a very real threat of energy blackouts this coming summer as both states push ahead with shutting down the cheapest and most reliable current forms of energy we have. David, will renewables ever give us the stable energy supply we need? It seems mad, particularly in this state when we're sitting on so much gas, that we could have a shortage.
Well, we've got coal as well in Victoria, which we've been running on for a very long time now. Whether or not you can get to a fully renewable system is more a matter of cost and reliability. And to my mind, it seems pretty risky to go down a path where your entire energy supply is dependent on the weather rather than dependent on what you can mine or what you can get from gas. So I think it's very risky over the long term. I've been saying for a long time that we need to look at other technologies such as nuclear energy. But yeah, we're risking blackouts. And a lot of this is around the infrastructure that they need to build as well. They need to build a web of networks all over the state and other infrastructure like batteries and condensers and all these things. And that's going to take time. It adds complexity, it adds cost. And where you've got more complexity, more cost, you have things go wrong.
Well, you've put up a private members' bill to remove the nuclear prohibition in this state. What are the chances that's going to get up? And with all due respect, why is it left to you to do this? Why aren't the Liberal opposition coming up with these plans and trying to ensure we have safe, reliable energy?
Well, with regards to the nuclear prohibition in Victoria, I just think it's a no-brainer that if people who are against it are saying, well, it's too expensive, well, why have the prohibition? That's not a good argument for prohibition.
No.
Look, as for the Liberal Party, I don't know. Like, they did end up supporting my bill in Parliament, but the current government, I think the Premier today said that she's never going to have nuclear because it's too risky. I would argue it's too risky to put, depend on the weather and depend on being perpetually dependent on China, which is what we're doing with the so-called cheap renewables.
It is just so dishonest, I think, to try to scare people off nuclear. It's really just ignoring the evidence from around the world. So many countries safely using nuclear energy. We're sitting on the world's biggest reserves of uranium and we're not. We spoke on the show last night about that promising poll for the Victorian Liberals in the Age newspaper. They're well in front of Labor according to that poll. Clearly Victorians are fed up, those state taxes are hurting. But are the Liberals a viable alternative? How are you seeing their performance in Parliament, and are they coming up with policies that differentiate them adequately from Labor?
Look, I think a lot of the decline in Labor really honestly has to do with Dan going away. A lot of people did like him. And if you look at it, it's quite interesting. The poll shows a decline in support for Labor, but it doesn't show people going to the Greens. The Greens are sort of flatlining, and it's going to the Liberal Party and crossbenchers like Libertarian Party.
Yeah.
And if you look at it, I think it's the first time I've seen it where the crossbenchers combined are actually gaining more support than either major party. So I think a lot of people are saying, well, I'm not happy with the government. Some of those are going and looking at the Liberal Party. Some of them are looking at minor parties like the Libertarian Party. As to whether the opposition is viable or not, look, they've got a lot of problems they need to sort out, I think. But they're trying to unify. How successful that is, I mean, that's up to the electorate, but they've certainly got a lot of problems and they've been on the back foot a lot over the last year.
Well, there's a lot of material that Labor give the Liberal Party, which they never use. I mean, you look at this week, this crazy position and conjecture about the treaty, with the minister making the most remarkable comments about colonisation and stolen land and people being murdered, the sort of things you'd expect to hear from a first-year arts student, not a senior cabinet minister. Why are the Liberals so reluctant to venture into those areas and where they know they're on safe ground? The overwhelming majority of Victorians do not want a treaty.
A lot of these things, I think they're just scared of being called names. Like we saw it with the with the fracking ban in the last term of Parliament. They were scared of getting called, fossil dinosaurs or whatever, and so they ended up supporting the government on that. We saw it with things around gender medicine and the Change and Suppression Act in the last term of Parliament. And we see it with issues like nuclear as well. Even though the majority of Victorians are okay with nuclear, they don't come out and say, yes, we're supportive of this, like the federal government has been doing, the federal opposition has been doing recently. So I think a lot of it is they're just sort of scared of being called names.
But at the end of the day, you are being called the state's unofficial opposition leader. So it's an honour, I guess. Because...
Oh, it is. Thank you.
And it's something you really took to during those COVID years where we had the Liberals, again, too scared to challenge some of the crazy draconian policies that we saw in this state. Before you go, we're seeing wonderful things from Argentina's new leader, Javier Milei. He's a libertarian like yourself. Does this give you hope that people will look at libertarians and say they don't just have some good ideas, they can actually govern?
Well, he's been handed probably one of the worst situations that you could ever come up with. The state was totally in chaos, like in every way, financially, socially, everything. And so he's really focused on economic issues. So one of the things he's done, they had a problem with their rental properties, same as what we've got in Victoria. He went to fully deregulate it because they had regulated pricing. So he wanted to deregulate that. They've seen an increase in the number of rental properties being available of over 240% in like a month or so. He's already brought the budget back into surplus, like in only a few months, by slashing the public service. And and also inflation is starting to come down. So I think he's making fantastic headway so far by focusing on solid libertarian policies. And I wish him all the best for the future. I think they're off to a good start considering he's only been there a few months.
David Limbrick, thank you so much for your time this evening.
Thanks for having me.
Still to come, Alex Epstein breaks down the left's latest claims that climate change is racist. Plus, lefties losing it. Welcome back. Now it's time for Lefties Losing It. We've been seeing a lot of Bill Maher lately. He has a book to flog, so he's been everywhere, from The View to Gutfeld. Of course, he went on Fox, that's where the audience is. But the more we see of him, the more clear it is that this lefty, who is occasionally sane and lucid, is either wildly ignorant or dishonest. Watch as Megyn Kelly educates him, or tries to, about election denial.
You keep saying sort of I'm nuts because I don't see the difference between the elephant and the mouse, and I'm telling you I identify them differently than you do. Hillary Clinton, of course, is the original election denier. I'm sure you voted for her in 2016.
Well, she's not an election denier.
She absolutely was the OG election denier.
First of all, she came out before the sun had risen to concede the election to Trump.
And then spent the next 4 years saying he was illegitimate. He was an illegitimate president.
Okay, well, first of all, she didn't say he was an illegitimate.
Yes, she did.
You tell me exactly what she said.
She said those exact words repeatedly.
Okay.
Yep, she did. She said those exact words, Bill.
I believe he knows he's an illegitimate president.
Is Bill Maher really that clueless about Hillary Clinton's election-denying ways? Was Maher hiding under a rock for the years she pushed the lie that the 2016 election was stolen, where she helped formulate and spread Russian collusion conspiracies that undermined democracy in the US? Maher is either frightfully ignorant or lying. There are no other options at this point. Let's remind him of some of the things Hillary has said.
I believe he knows he's an illegitimate president. He knows. So I know that he knows that this wasn't on the level. I don't know that we'll ever know everything that happened, but clearly we know a lot and are learning more every day, and history will probably sort it all out.
As I've been telling candidates who have come to see me, you can run the best campaign. You can even become the nominee, and you can have the election stolen from you.
Apparently, Bill Maher missed that, and he also missed the truth about January 6th, or as he calls it, the insurrection. Let's listen now to some of his paranoid fantasies.
On January 20th, 2025, he'll show up at the White House, whether he's invited or not. And I don't think that's going to be good.
You think he's gonna bomb in if he lost?
Yes. Oh yeah, bomb is a word I wouldn't even throw around lightly.
Oh, stop it! He's not going to do that.
Right, like there was never an attack on the Capitol.
Oh, I hear you. But he's not going to show up at the inauguration.
Like they didn't show up at the Capitol and break windows and knock down doors and kill cops and chase.
They didn't do that.
And they didn't break windows.
They didn't
knock
kill
down
cops.
They of course did.
No, they didn't.
Who did? They died of natural causes that day?
Capitol Police Officer Brian Sicknick, the medical examiner, has determined that he suffered 2 strokes and died of natural causes.
Yeah, nobody died that day.
Cops?
No, not true. Who?
Okay.
Who?
Oh, I don't remember the names.
They didn't. There was Brian Sicknick, who died later after the fact.
Megyn Kelly is so much smarter, better informed and better at her job than Ma. It's frightening. He's the best they've got, though. And the man who prides himself on his depth of knowledge and critical thinking skills kept on embarrassing himself. Here, Megyn schools him on the selective enforcement of the law that saw Biden still classify documents and not be charged.
One actually had the ability to declassify documents and keep them because he'd been the president, and one didn't because he should have been looking at documents only in a SCIF while a sitting U.S. senator, and clearly he stole classified documents that he wasn't entitled to and never had the ability to declassify them.
Yeah. Maybe you know more about that than I do. I don't remember that part of it, and I always don't trust anything I hear until I vet it from the other side, because everybody sort of has their one-sided view of it, and narrative is more important than truth. I know this is the right-wing narrative.
I'm not like that, Bill. I care about facts. I practiced law for 10 years. I want to get the cases right.
You know, Conservatives are guilty of the bigotry of low expectations when it comes to Bill Maher. I've done it too. I've praised him and played his clips when he's occasionally said something sensible, something the right has been saying for years. But at his core, he's a delusional Democrat who has spoken of his dream of seeing Gavin Newsom becoming president. Yeah, the California governor, that one. I think fellow traveller Bill Burr summed up Maher nicely during their recent chat.
Most of the you say is not smart. It's just sort of obscure.
It's not obscure to a certain percentage of people.
I'm not
some giant egghead. I'm just
I know you're not that smart.
And Greg Gutfeld had the right idea about Maher, who was on his show earlier this week.
That's the most important thing that's going on in this country. He didn't concede the last election. He's not going to concede this election.
You don't know that.
When? And everybody said, oh, you smoke too much pot. Turned out I smoked just the right amount of pot.
There's no right amount. So, yeah. Dr. Drew.
Yes, sir.
You're really good at diagnosing mental illness.
Okay.
What is Bill's problem?
Maybe lay off the pot, Bill. That might clear up the TDS. And let's continue with Lefties Losing It. Here we have a biological man identifying as a woman using their position as the Assistant Secretary for Health in the Biden administration to lecture us about how global warming is disproportionately affecting Black people.
Climate change is having a disproportionate effect on the physical and mental health of Black communities. Black Americans are more likely than white Americans to live in areas and housing that increase their susceptibility to climate-related health issues. And 65% of Black Americans report feeling anxious about climate change's impact.
Joining me now is the author of Fossil Future, Alex Epstein. Alex, your response to that, I would argue climate change policies do disproportionately impact poor people, not Black people, poor people, whatever colour they are. Is that how you see it? Because I find it hard to understand how global warming is impacting Black people more than everybody else.
I mean, the truth is that, you know, what they're calling global warming, so bad weather, they're saying it's racist, but it's actually classist in the sense of if you're poor, it's hard to deal with bad weather. That's why as the world has gotten richer, we've become much, much safer from climate. We have a 98% decline in climate-related disaster deaths over the last century. So obviously the solution, if you care about susceptibility to climate, is for everyone to get rich, even within the United States, let alone the rest of the world, where most people are incredibly poor, even compared to the poorest people in the United States. So on the one hand, it's just the exact opposite prescription of what's needed. It's just we need to become wealthier. And then on top of it, this person has the goal to say that blacks are suffering climate-related anxiety. That's because you're catastrophizing climate. Like, maybe the government should prescribe fossil future. That's the solution to climate anxiety.
That is a very good prescription indeed. Now, here's some good news. This week, shareholders at oil giant Shell overwhelmingly rejected a climate change resolution filed by green activists, urging it to align its reduction targets to the Paris Climate Agreement. Alex, only 18% of shareholders back this proposal. In March, we saw Shell weaken its 2030 carbon reduction target. They cited strong demand for gas. They're refocusing on more profitable operations like oil and gas. Seems to be a win for common sense, Alex.
I think this is a good development, and contrast this to, say, 2020, when we had a global pandemic, we had lockdowns that hurt most the oil and gas industry, particularly oil, because oil is the basis of modern transportation. And you had all these people saying, I was wrong for saying that, we have a fossil future, that we actually need more oil going forward. And they're like, look, oil demand is low. It's not good to invest in oil. Now, why am I bringing this up in this context? Because the fact that oil stocks happen to be crashing because of those circumstances allowed a bunch of opportunistic ESG types to claim that disinvesting from oil was somehow a wise investment thing, when in fact what happened is right after that, oil became one of the best performing sectors in the world as demand rebounded and then continued to increase to record levels where we are now. And we're still increasing. So what's happened is all these do-gooder ESG types who were thinking they would get rich being ESG are realizing that they're getting poor being ESG, and that if they have Shell or BP or all these other virtue signaling companies who've claimed that they want to go net zero, that if they actually do that, it's going to crater their stock. So I'm glad that people are waking up to financial reality, and it's helping defang this really insidious ESG movement, because that not only hurts the oil companies, it most of all hurts the oil consumers, which is the world's 8 billion people who need cheap, reliable energy.
Well, how powerful is the ESG mob, the environmental, social and governance lobby? They seem to control a great deal of the money, Alex. Is their power weakening with the pandemic over and things getting back to normal?
There are signs of weakness, but we definitely cannot let up at all. I mean, you're seeing more and more people stand up to it. It used to be pretty lonely to stand up to it. Now there are a lot more people saying that it's bad. And in particular, the stuff I'm most interested in the environmental side, the idea of rapidly eliminating fossil fuels, that is a global death sentence. You're increasingly having people recognize that to some extent. But unfortunately, the ESG movement has totally poisoned so many institutions and taken them over. And I'll just give an example of in the realm of AI, which is a new huge source of demand in the United States and around the world. A lot of these leading AI users like Microsoft and Facebook have been promoting ESG poison for years, and that's led to the shutdown of reliable power plants on our grid. This should sound familiar to Australians, and trying to replace them with unreliables. And now we don't have nearly enough electricity for AI. So you're seeing these institutions are not yet apologizing. I'll think it's great when Microsoft and Google and Facebook apologize for ruining our grid with ESG. Until then, I'm not complacent.
Well, our National Science Agency, the CSIRO, has published a report that insists that powering our country with nuclear energy is going to be far more expensive, nearly double the cost of doing it with renewables. $16 billion and 16 years is what it will apparently take to build a large-scale nuclear reactor. Is this true, Alex, or is this just another sign of the CSIRO being captured by the green ideology?
I want to draw people's attention to a weird kind of schizophrenia that you have going on here, which you often see, which is there's a total can't-do attitude with fossil fuels and in particular nuclear. So they act like, oh, it has to be incredibly expensive, even though, say, South Korea is able to do it cheaply. The United States used to be able to do it cheaply before we ruined it with bad regulations. So they have a total can't-do attitude with regard to nuclear, but with unreliable solar and wind, which have never powered any country anywhere without totally parasiting unreliable fossil fuels and nuclear, they have this infinite unicorn fantasy can-do attitude. And so one of the fallacies here is they're comparing unreliable power to reliable power. So that's, that's like comparing rotten oranges to apples. So they're not comparisons. What you need to happen is if you want to use solar and wind, the so-called renewables, those companies should figure out how to make them actually supply reliable electricity, provide the batteries themselves. Then what they see is just prohibitively expensive, but they're just comparing the cost of unreliable to reliable. So that's intellectually non-serious.
It is intellectually dishonest. You're absolutely right. Now, Prime Minister Anthony Albanese has unveiled a $550 million strategy aimed at turning Australia into a world-leading battery manufacturer. This is another step, we are told, in firming up renewables and supporting the net zero transition. But can batteries ever provide that baseload power that a first world nation like Australia needs?
Well, ever is a long time, but, with the technology we currently have, they're nowhere near close. They're not even the best form of storage. What's called pumped storage tends to be much cheaper. We just don't have any form of man-made storage right now that can accommodate the unreliability of solar and wind. So what happens is you build these battery facilities, and what happens is they'll say, oh, we have this many megawatts of batteries, and isn't that going to be great? But a megawatt of batteries is not the same as a megawatt of natural gas, because the megawatt of batteries usually lasts 4 hours maximum. So if it only lasts 4 hours, you need a lot more than 4 hours worth to be able to handle highs and lows of the sun and the wind over, days, let alone weeks. So it's just this fake. It's just this fake stuff being added on to pretend that solar and wind are being reliable, but they're not reliable unless they can truly be self-sufficient without parasiting on the other stuff. So again, I say, Australian government, anyone who thinks they can make it work, have somebody figure out how to make a solution just using solar, wind, and batteries. See how much that costs to provide reliable electricity with the same reliability of coal or natural gas or nuclear. You'll be in for a rude awakening. But go ahead and try, but don't just steal everyone's money and restrict fossil fuels and promise the best, because there's no evidence it'll work at all.
And what about the elements that go into making these giant batteries? Where they come from, the supply chain, the reliance on China. Is that something that isn't given due consideration, Alex?
Well, in general, there's just the negatives or challenges of solar and wind are never given due consideration, and then the negatives or challenges of fossil fuels are amplified 100 times and just exaggerated beyond all proportion. So there's definitely this bias. I don't think it means fundamentally you can't produce batteries at a much larger scale. But if you look at near term, what people are proposing with these different net zero plans is just a totally unprecedented increase in mining in a very anti-mining global environment, particularly in the Western countries that used to be free, but now have many, many restrictions on mining. And this is a basic contradiction of the green movement, which says that to achieve, quote, green energy, we need to mine the world more than we ever have, which the green movement is going to oppose. And I think this confirms my thesis in Fossil Future, and people can learn more about this at energytalkingpoints.com, that the green movement is really an anti-energy movement. It pretends to support energy, but it really just hates human impact on Earth. And if you hate human impact, you hate energy, because energy allows us to impact the Earth to make our lives better.
Alex Epstein, thank you so much for your time this evening.
Thanks, Rita.
Still to come, Ben Affleck's week goes from bad to worse as his cringeworthy attempt at comedy and his shaky marriage are scrutinised. And inside the Elvis Presley estate fight, who's going to own Graceland? You're watching the Rita Panahi show. Ben Affleck's week has gone from bad to worse. Not only is the actor's marriage to singer Jennifer Lopez reportedly on the rocks, despite the recent release of her documentary, The Greatest Love Story Never Told, but his cringeworthy appearance on the Netflix roast of Tom Brady is being pulled apart by the star of the night, Nikki Glaser. Here is Affleck bombing on the roast stage.
You sitting there hiding behind your keyboard, spewing out all this toxic shit about people you'd be afraid to come up to if you saw them at the car wash. You know, people who went out there and did something, who were successful, or even if another player ended up catching a football on his helmet, maybe they failed. But fans have your back, okay? You guys out there talking all right, behind your keyboard, that doesn't make you a fan. That makes you a
Oh, and here is Nikki Glaser actually being funny.
You really are, I mean, you're the best to ever play for too long. I mean, you retired, then you came back, and then you retired again. I mean, I get it. It's hard to walk away from something that's not your pregnant girlfriend. It's tough. Hey, to be fair, he didn't know she was pregnant. He just thought she was getting fat. And Tom hates fat. I mean, do you guys know about his diet program? It is so strict, but if you follow it exactly as he does, you too can lose your family.
Nikki says part of the reason why Ben Affleck bombed on the night was because of his poor attitude.
Because I don't like to watch people bomb. He didn't prepare.
Yeah.
He's someone who's famous enough that thinks like this is probably beneath them to do this. And so I'm just going to do a favor. It's not going to be that big of a deal.
Joining me now is entertainment and royal reporter Kinsey Schofield. Is he really that arrogant, Kinsey? Is he just going to show up to this massive roast of a greatest of all time, Tom Brady? He was definitely, I reckon, the low light of the whole 3-hour affair.
Yeah, I mean, he's best friends with Jimmy Kimmel. Why couldn't he have consulted Jimmy or some of his writers to provide him with something legitimately funny, legitimately good? He really just looked bitter and kind of unhinged throughout that Tom Brady roast. So I agree. Like, clearly something is going on in his personal life, and he seems like he isn't entitled and too macho to ask for help. I don't know. It wasn't funny. It just kind of seemed very resentful.
And it has been called the greatest roast of all time. And there was just so much champagne comedy throughout. And that just stood out because you're right. It was just angry and bitter. It wasn't even he was trying to be funny and failing. It just was a sort of a mad rant. Now, I've got to ask you about this Cate Blanchett dress. The internet is divided about what it all means. There's some think her dress is referencing the Palestinian flag at Cannes. Some say the colours of white, black and green with the red of the Cannes red carpet makes a deliberate political statement. But when you look at the dress up close, the white looks more like a soft pink. It's a Jean-Paul Gaultier original designed. Are people just desperate to see politics in everything, or was she trying to make a subtle statement here?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm 100% with you. Blanchett was one of the original actors who signed the Artists for Ceasefire open letter to President Joe Biden. That was calling for an end to the war. But if you look at that gown, that photo you just showed, that's a blush pink. I do think that the flag symbolism is a bit of a stretch, and people with an agenda are perpetuating that narrative. I challenge them to try to wear that dress in Gaza, though.
Yeah, well, she is very political. She's made all sorts of statements about global warming and other issues. And you mentioned signing that letter. So I think that's part of the reason people are looking for some deeper meaning. But my take of it is it's just a dress. Move on, people. Now, actress Scarlett Johansson has expressed her shock and anger at a new feature from the AI program ChatGPT that used a voice she described as eerily similar to hers. So similar that friends and family can't tell the difference. She revealed she'd previously rejected an offer from the tech company to license her voice for the product. So did they just go ahead and create her voice without her consent, Kinsey?
You know, it is strange because when they approached her to do this, it was in the middle of the actors' strike. And one of the biggest actors and writers' strike demands was that they navigate the world of AI more carefully because no one wants to get replaced. Had she agreed to do this, she would have been seen as a traitor in Hollywood. So yeah, she rejected the offer. And it does seem like ChatGPT said, okay, well, we're just going to go find somebody that sounds just like you. And they argue that it's not her and it's not supposed to sound like her, but they sure did rip Sky, who sounds just like Scarlett, off the internet as quickly as she entered. And so I think that that was almost an admission of guilt right there, that Sky disappeared so quickly.
Now, Elvis Presley's family are fighting hard to keep his iconic mansion Graceland off the real estate market. Its sale was scheduled for, I think, today or tomorrow. His granddaughter, actress Riley Keough, obtained a temporary restraining order against the sale of the Memphis property by Nozani Investments, who claimed Lisa Mary Presley, Riley's mum, and Elvis's daughter had borrowed $3.8 million from the company and used Graceland as security for the loan. Riley claims her mum never borrowed that money and never gave them a deed of trust. Tell me more about this. I'm surprised that they could be trying to sell it for a relatively small debt of $3.8 million. I was at Graceland earlier this year, and my gosh, it is a money-making enterprise. The tours are full, they're expensive, there's just thousands there daily. It seems odd that they would have any sort of money issues.
Well, obviously, you're more impressed with it than Prince Harry was, who complained about it in Spare. But yeah, this attempt to foreclose on Graceland is about to become the subject of multiple criminal investigations, including interest from the FBI. The foreclosure was triggered by an alleged unpaid $3.8 million debt Lisa Marie never paid using Graceland as collateral. But like you said, Riley said that this never happened. And people that have had access to this paperwork say it looks very suspicious. The judge has put the temporary halt on the foreclosure, but this investigation is heating up, and people at Graceland are pointing the finger at a very specific person. You know, in that investment company you mentioned, they've already backed out, and they said that they won't continue to pursue it. If somebody really owes you that kind of money, do you so easily back out? So I think that this story has only just begun, and I can't wait to see where it goes. It seems like somebody is doing something, something sinister.
Now, what did Prince Harry say about Graceland in Spare? I missed that little part. He wasn't impressed?
He was not impressed. He said he could not believe how dungy and gross that he made fun of the carpets. And he was like, I can't believe that Americans think a quote unquote king lived here. Like Graceland was beneath him. It's like, Harry, what have you done? Elvis built, that was Elvis's shrine. He built that from hard work. He was a nobody and he made something of himself. And that was like his sanctuary. And Harry, what have you done?
Well, exactly. I mean, whatever it is, you're so right. Elvis was a self-made man. He was dirt poor. And if he actually bothered to take note of some of the memorabilia there, he would have seen just how poor the Presley family were and how Elvis moved his own mother into that property to give her the sort of lifestyle that she never had as he was growing up. Harry, really. Now, we've run out of time. Next week, we're going to have to get to the bottom of what is happening with Queen Mary and King Frederick of Denmark, because there's body language experts coming out saying that those two are not on good terms. Kinsey Schofield, thank you for your time. That's it from me. Up next is Newsnight. Don't forget, Lefties Losing It, 9:30 tomorrow night.